Hi, everyone. Welcome to one of our Foresight Fellowship career counseling sessions. I'm really excited today to have someone who's been really at the forefront of not only academic science and science really as we know it, but more thinking on a meta level and not just thinking, but also building about how we can improve the scientific ecosystem, how we can improve funding, how we can improve the kind of process of scientific evidence generation, evidence checking, and just scientific progress in general. Building organizations, advising organizations, assisting with the strategic planning of organizations in that space, specifically with three of my favorite orgs that have, in the few recent years, popped up, including Arcadia, including Astera, and then more recently, really, the Navigation Fund. So thank you so much for the fantastic work that you've been doing on all of these levels. Really big fan of this. And I'm not the only one, I think, within the Foresight ecosystem. And we have a few of our fellows here already, with a few of them, the others joining in a sec. So maybe we'll just kickstart it with brief introductions from the fellows, just that you know who is here. And then I'm going to ask you a few questions.
Yeah, great.
You guys can interrupt. So maybe Matthew, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you. Yeah, so I am based in the UK, working on some ideas in space technology. So previously my work has been in space weather, so trying to protect infrastructure from radiation in space, that can affect satellites and ground level technologies. But now trying to think a bit more broad and think about other ways in which we can use space for advancing human flourishing.
Cool. Can I ask any follow-up questions?
Yeah, go for it. It's an open space.
Okay, great. And how did you get into that?
Yeah, so I did a mathematics degree and kind of nerded out on mathematics for a while, and then got super interested in fluid dynamics and ended up doing some work with a professor on fluids in space, plasmas in space, how they behave, and then learned about how things in space can affect infrastructure on Earth. And now we're so much more dependent on satellite technologies and all that we rely on now, just the sort of vulnerability of those technologies to these low probability but potentially high impact threats tuned my interest. And I worked for a bit in the nuclear energy industry as well, because they're quite interested in these low probability but potentially high severity risks. So I was setting up some of the initial work on how space weather can affect nuclear power stations as well.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
All right, go for it.
Yeah, hi, I'm Angad, and I am also on the space side of things. I am an academic at the University of London, so it's called Queen Mary University of London. We have too many in the University of London. But I guess I'd have a very specific request to you, is that I'm supposed to submit the 2-pager to Astera for the residency because I got shortlisted for it. So if you can shed a little more light on that, because I got shortlisted in December too, and then I was supposed to interview, but then I shouldn't say this in a recording maybe, but I was then disqualified because I asked for too much resources, I think. So if there's some kind of understanding of what the residency does offer, that'd be cool. On the technical side, what I'm working on is on inflatable space stations, so how you can make large artificial gravity space stations. Instead of assembling them robotically, can we just fly one in a single launch vehicle and blow it up into something big, and it could host, I don't know, between 50 to 100 people. So that's the general idea.
Okay, got it. Thanks. I can try to answer your questions later, but I don't get so in the weeds with all the different specific applications there. So I don't know if I'll be able to comment on the specifics of yours, but I can try and answer generally.
Yeah, general answers only, just how budgeting might work for someone who lives in London and doesn't know what's happening on the other side.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, those are questions we get all the time as well. I think it's sometimes difficult when you're drafting an application, you don't really know on the other side and what their concerns are. And so I think it's a useful question.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we'll just start with you, just to set the stage a little bit also for the fellows and others who might be watching afterwards. You've had a pretty interesting, I think, life trajectory. And I would just be super interested to hear a little bit more about how did you get into the work that you're doing? Because it's not just in a scientific field, or at least you passed that, but now you're more really at this meta level, really trying to steer up multiplication factors for progress more in general. So how did you get into this? Was it always an interest of yours? Were there any pivotal moments, anything that would help people understand your trajectory?
Okay. Maybe I'll just preface it with one statement, which is I'm glad you're doing this. I'm always a little bit skeptical of career counseling, because I think everybody is just pretty unique. And the moment you try to game it like a linear path that's generalizable, you lose the thing that's you. And so I just want to preface by saying that I don't know if any of my experiences are at all relatable. So the quick answer is no. I never thought that I would be doing this, not because I like thought there was something else I was going to be doing. I think I just am not the kind of person that maps my life out very far in advance. I didn't even think I was going to be a scientist in college. I was like in a philosophy major, and then I've switched around based on what is of interest to me, and I'm opportunistic in that way. So I think at a high level, like in retrospect, it's not surprising what I'm doing for a number of reasons I can talk about, but I wouldn't say that I like knew this was what I was trying to do. I don't think anyone could have. I don't know if like meta science was a thing when I was in my 20s. So I guess what's not surprising about it is that given my past interests, I've always been very curious about systems and trying to understand like root causes of things. And I think my gravitation towards thinking about science as a system is definitely related to that, right? Like I think my own individual experience as a scientist really revealed to me what were the bottlenecks that were unique to me and what were the bottlenecks that were general to everybody. And that is just a thing that I'm like very interested in. It's a hard thing to think about because obviously the older and the more entrenched systems are, the harder it is to change a lot of those things. But that is like my core interest. And I would say I've made decisions in my career based on where I feel like I have the most unique ability to have some impact. And so that has caused me to pivot a lot because it's almost like when I feel like I've started succeeding at a thing, I start getting really uncomfortable. Is this now actually, am I fungible at this point? Am I continuing down a path that's very like replaceable? Or is there, I like being in like messy, difficult situations. So I think that is like my personality and just my own internal compass from first principles of like where I like to be is where it's like the most messy. And so, yeah, even my academic path, like on the outside, I've told this to a lot of people, like it looks very linear and looks like a thing that I planned out, but I always was very begrudgingly in academia. I never actually wanted to be in academia, so it always felt like a temporary thing. And that's how I feel about almost every chapter of my career. And it's only in retrospect that it looks like a plan. And so that's why it was actually quite easy for me to pivot because I was never entirely sure what my contribution was. And you don't really know until you do it, is the other thing, right? I didn't know what academia was. Even when I was interviewing for faculty jobs, I was like, I know what I'm supposed to be doing right now, literally on these faculty interviews, and what I'm proposing to do for the next few months when I get this job. But after that, I have no way to really pattern match it because I haven't done it before. And so I just always made a deal with myself at every chapter of my career. I will do this for as long as I feel satisfied by it and as long as I enjoy it. Because to me, like enjoyment is hand in hand with if I'm making a real unique contribution. And so I basically check in with myself periodically, at least once a year, of just like, pause, is this even going well in my terms, on my terms? And yeah, at some point it just wasn't satisfying anymore. It felt like I was doing well, but there are others who could do just as good, if not better, at that thing than me. So sorry, this is like kind of philosophical ramble, but happy to like dig into any of those things as like a framework for talking about it.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think that there's a few folks who ended up like in meta science questions that never thought they would. They were like straight on an academic trajectory and never really thought that they would leave. But it sounds like you were, first of all, begrudgingly within academia in the first place. And so I guess the move to Arcadia, to more focusing on like the kind of meta science and open science framework, was that mostly because of the problems that you saw within academia? And then you're like, okay, I'm going to do something about it like right now. Or because I think that move from academia into a different world, that's a hard shift, right? To come about. And how did Arcadia come into fruition?
Yeah. So it was, I think, motivated by a couple things. At some point, you just accumulate frustrations about something, right? And it's like impossible to look away. And I tried, like within academia, there were a number of things I was trying to figure out how to make happen for myself. Like, how do I build a lab that's really focused on tools? How do I jump into new fields or new systems? And all of those things have like friction around them in academia for a lot of reasons, whether it's like funding, the way we publish, or cultural. And I think I just felt at some point that I already maxed out how much I could tweak within the system. And it was doing okay, but now then there were like a bunch of forces that made me think there might be more I can contribute beyond tweaking it for myself as an individual. So one was like I came into a lot more resources. That's like a privilege that I think is important to not erase from the record. If you don't have money, like you can't actually try very ambitious things outside of academia. So I want to make sure that's clear, that that's a huge privilege I had. I think I felt like I couldn't look myself in the mirror if I had that privilege and didn't actually do something risky with it. I also felt like I'm not really the kind of person that loves being in the spotlight, actually. And I'm not great if like my main tool is to talk about a thing. Like my main tool as a scientist is to experiment with a new way of doing things, which that's why it felt obvious to me. Like I just need to actually convince myself through experimentation of what solutions could be for other people, which is why Arcadia started. And so yeah, I've been like hesitant about getting too involved in all the more meta studies as opposed to saying we're just going to try a bunch of things and learn that way and just try and be as transparent as possible about that real-time experiment that not very many people get to do. There was also COVID happening, so all of the things that were like frustrating to us within current institutions was just like magnified. And any like security I felt, which maybe scientists feel this like 10 times, 100 times more now than even COVID times. But I was like, whatever security I thought I had in academia or in these institutions is just an illusion. Like the world can change like that. And then what's going to make me feel proud of what I'm doing if I just let go of that sense of like stability? And so all those things were happening. And I bet we're going to see another wave of this kind of stuff coming in this moment because technologies are exploding. There's like political unsteadiness. I think those are actually, while difficult experiences, create some cracks for people to feel compelled to try new things.
Yeah, for sure. AI, not last of one of these technologies that's
For
probably
sure.
gonna make it at least more questionable whether a normal academic PhD trajectory will be, how relevant it will be, especially in fields like AI or neuroscience.
Right. And a lot of the cool thing about AI right now is what it's doing is it's like making it impossible for us to look away from things that have been problematic for a while. So my biggest focus right now is actually rethinking the way we do scientific publishing, because I actually feel like a lot of people in meta-science spend a lot of time thinking about research funding and not nearly enough time thinking about the way we talk about, share, evaluate, create community around our results, which is publishing. But we've narrowed it into thinking about journals. And now with AI, like journals are already like 100 years behind. But now with AI, it's even more obvious. What are we doing? Like we don't even need to manually read papers anymore at this point. It's scalable through agents. And there's so many tools coming out every day that I feel like the journal system is just actually indefensible even more than it was like 1 year ago.
Yeah, so could you tell us a little bit like what Arcadia's role is in shaping that ecosystem?
Yeah, Arcadia's role is really just trying to, I would say two things, like test for ourselves as scientists in-house. What does publishing look like if you divorce yourself from the baggage of journals in the past? And that's been really fun. It's been messy, right? We were like, how do you know when to publish? That's an example of something we have to actually work through empirically. Because when you have journals, you know when to publish. You publish when you have a publishable unit, as we call it, which is something that we think journals will accept. That is an arbitrary point in time. And if you remove that and you hold the reins of when you decide to publish, that's a very tricky question, right? Like you want to publish either, and we say this in-house, like either when it would benefit from feedback for real, or if you learned something that could be of benefit to someone else. Those are pretty vague. So we have to like work through that. So that's what one goal of ours is, to like work through how to think that and almost like re-engineer. We've been brainwashed to think about it in a very particular way. So undoing that. And then second, which like I underestimated the value of this, was just to normalize the idea that science can happen outside of journals. When I first started Arcadia, I had a lot of people like very angry about it, that we decided right at the get-go that we're not going to publish in journals, we're going to rapidly and transparently publish outside. And people were, I was surprised by the degree that people were angry, because I wasn't even asking anyone else to do it. I was just like, we are just going to try this thing. And people are like, you're going to ruin science. I don't know. People were getting very up in arms about it. And then merely a year later, all of that went away. Nobody said that anymore. In fact, I started seeing some examples of people doing the same thing and saying, oh yeah, Arcadia did it, like we can do it. So I realize now that the second goal is to just normalize by doing it, that you could sit there and fight with people all day, but once they see an example of it in the real world, suddenly the Overton window shifts and what people think is normal changes. And that's actually very powerful. And that's, I think, the thing that I wish I could go back and tell myself when I was earlier in my career, that has more power than you realize. And that can be done by one person anywhere. And it's actually like sometimes as scientists, we want to articulate a really sound argument and present the facts, present the rationale, but just doing it is a thing, which is why actually at Astera, we're going to start funding people. And we haven't even put out this blog, so maybe I'll be the first publicly to know, but we've asked all of our residents, so Angad, you might be interested in knowing this, that we are asking all of them to figure out how they're going to publish their work outside of journals. And that's been a really fun new constraint. And we're happy to fund more. Like, we're happy to provide them more support on this in addition to their budgets to really be creative about that. And the cool thing is it's changed for some of them, even their project strategy, because they're like, even though they may have resisted in the beginning, they're like, oh my God, if I literally don't have to worry about journals as an output at all anymore, that's a game changer. And now what do I do? And it's liberating. And so anyways, that's like two big goals of ours in both places, like figure out what we're supposed to do through experimentation and then change people's perception of what's possible. Matt?
Yeah, what was the biggest pushback you were getting? Or what were the reasons for the pushback that you were getting from the
It's the
scientists?
same thing. The funny thing, it's the same thing that I would push back on when I was an academic. Like I don't have a clean record, right? Like I published in Nature, I published in Cell, I did all the things. And in my mind, I was very justified. The list goes on and I see it in everybody else right now too. So I get it. I'm too early in my career. I can't take this risk. My trainees are vulnerable. I can't force them to do this. I need funding, otherwise I can't survive. I'm a woman, so it's hard enough for me already. My field is small. I'm new to it, so I need that extra validation. Like, I get all of those things. And then also, literally none of us are special. We all have all those reasons, which is how the status quo stays put. And so, like, it is just necessary at some point for some people to say, and not everybody has the privilege to do this, I know, but some people have to just be like, you know what, fuck it. Like, all those things are true, and I'm going to figure it out. And that's the fuck it privilege I want to give people through our funding. It's just like, I am now, as a funder, telling you this is like what I want you to try, and I will give you more to try it. And so I'm not trying to convince people at the back end of the curve. I'm trying to find people at the front end of the curve who are ready for that, to take that leap with us and say, like, how do I give you more power to try that? Because I think slowly it'll extend towards the back, but not by trying to reach the back first through argumentation. So yeah, like things like I can't because, and actually this is a really common thing in climate work. And maybe this is true in space work. I don't know, but you can imagine this line of reasoning. The community is too small, like we're too new, it's too controversial, we can't afford it. We need validation from like the rest of the science community to make this work meaningful.
But the change that you were implementing, and I'm not super familiar with what happened there, but it sounds like it was just an alternative. It wasn't like, it was just saying, look, we've got this other way of publishing or this other way of getting work out there.
Oh, so no, worse, it's an alternative, but the forcing function is no more in journals.
Okay. Yeah.
Because then you're doing double work.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense, right? And also, I think my husband and I, we just don't want to put more money towards an old system that we think we all need to move forward from. And it was the most powerful thing I've seen when we first did it at Arcadia, because when we said, okay, it's an alternative, like you're saying, we got everybody applying, right? Oh yeah, I'll just put it in bioarchive. Yeah. But putting it in bioarchive, and this is not a diss on bioarchive, but it's not strong enough of a forcing function to cause you to completely rethink the design of your science to now exclude that goal. And so when we said, this is the line, you can't even publish in journals. In fact, we aggressively want you to do something else. We lost a bunch of applicants, but I think that was good, right? Because we gained a bunch of people who were actually ready for the real experiment. And I think it's actually a very important sort of constraint to have there. And so for some people, it's funny. It's like you could use the same argument in the field of climate, right? You could say the field is so small, like I have to publish in Nature. You could also say the field is so small, it's so easy for me to do something different and change the course of this field. And also, by the way, for climate, who is even our audience? Who do we need to convince? Is it the elite ivory tower people that are reading Nature? Or is it maybe the masses that we don't normally reach through journals that need convincing? So I think it's an interesting thing to debate. And that's what we're doing now, right? Like we just need to try it. I have my own theories, but I don't think the experiment has been tried in earnest in most places because we're all scared to step away from the old. And I get it. But like, I think I see my role now, especially as a funder, to like find the people who are ready to take a leap. Because otherwise we will be here stuck for the rest of humanity. There's always an excuse. Angad?
Yes, I was gonna ask for like maybe more specific examples of what alternatives do look like. Are we talking about Substacks? Are we talking about blogs? Are we talking about GitHub repos with data?
Yeah.
What is something that you
Yeah.
think actually has lasting value? Because let's say 50 years later when we're dead, people still have to use this stuff.
100%. So yeah, these are things we worry about and actually think quite deeply about. First of all, it has to be findable, right? The stuff we do right now, Arcadia, you can actually find it on Google Scholar, but it has to have like longevity in the way you're saying, right? Let's say you don't want to like publish with some random company and then they're just like gone in a year, and then where does your stuff go? So it has to be archivable in a way. So yeah, there are strategies for doing that. So you could do Substack and combine it with Zenodo. We actually have a whole explainer doc that we've been sharing internally, and I wonder if it would be helpful to start sharing that externally, where we've vetted a bunch of different things and combinations that would meet these FAIR principles that are really important for the integrity of scientific publishing. But yeah, we're trying to figure out like what's the easiest way to meet people where they are. If you have to tell them you got to do this and this and sign up for this and set up this platform and blah, it's actually very difficult as opposed to being like, yeah, here's our recommendations: Substack plus Zenodo, GitHub plus this, things that people are already using. And then the other thing that we're trying to fund, which I think a lot of people are interested in this, is like, what's going to be the tool layer of the future that allows scientists to, with more agency, curate the science they care about, connect the dots across different fields, like knowledge graphs, ways to like scan data, publicly available data. There's a lot of this stuff that's happening and more that's coming that's actually going to mean that it almost doesn't matter that much, like how you release it, as long as it's with FAIR principles. And meaning it's like findable and can stick around, because we're like not manually reading and digesting everything the way we did even a few years ago anymore.
But do we care about any metrics at all? Not that I'm saying we should, but I'm curious. Do we care about, I don't know, Google Analytics traffic to know that, okay, people are coming and reading this? Is it as basic as that for us to estimate some kind of impact?
That is like a very deep, good question. And I don't know the answer to that. But here's what I think is that it's not one metric that applies to everything. And I think what we need to actually do is think about many different ways to measure and many different ways for scientists as well as funders to evaluate for themselves, right? Like traffic is one thing. Pull requests is a whole different thing. Seeing like your stuff actually get reused, and pull requests are like a sick proxy for that. But what are some other proxies? Like, and who do you think your targeted users are? Is it pharma? Is it other scientists? Like that, those are all really relevant questions to think about, the many ways we should be measuring it and the many ways we need to get those measurement tools into everybody's hands, right? You can measure the same body of work differently and get totally different answers. And so anyways, I'm not trying to just like hand wave over your question. My point is, I don't know. And I think that's like exactly the kind of stuff I need people to start experimenting with and like pitching and getting us to even fund the tool builders for that at places like Astera Navigation Fund.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Max?
Yeah, hey, I've been marginally interested in this issue as well. Like I've been reading stuff on fixing like this academic journal issue, but it's like pretty pessimistic to me. It's stuck in almost like a bad Nash equilibrium. What's your thought process on how do you get both, like not only, let's say, publishers or like scientists to use this, but also like institutions. Isn't like publishing a big criteria for hiring for PhDs and judging the ability of students? I'm not sure this is relevant, but would like to hear your thoughts on this.
Oh, no, it's entirely relevant to the question. I would also be pessimistic if I thought the goal was to change academia from the inside. I'll just say that. I think the thing that's actually made me really excited about the future and leaning more, even more into trying to solve by building is that I feel like journals are dead no matter what. They're too behind. I don't think we're going to convince publishers, by the way. Why would they decide to not exist in their current form? So because at some point, it's just not going to be relevant enough to hold on to. And so what I'm more worried about is like, how do we take the reins right now in a way where like scientists can have more agency and a voice in building what they think is important, as opposed to like changing without their influence or their input. And so I feel like the strategy I've been taking, this is my theory of change, is just forget about academia for a second. Okay, there's a lot of science happening outside of academia. That's what I want to go after first, because only by going after that first can I actually untether from the system to think about the right way to do things. There's a lot of people who've tried to rethink publishing by working with people who are using it the old way, and then they just get these like slight revisions of the current framework. You can't actually do a different thing and think about it from first principles of what the ideal should be if you have to make concessions, such as things like career and funding and all of that. And so I think like I agree with you. And because of that, my choice is to move outside, which is like why we have the Astera residency program, why we have other ways of funding people and trying to find people who are outside. And by the way, it's not even just like people like you, right? There's actually a whole bunch of people in the startup world that do science. It's funny because academics don't even think about that, right? They only think about what's in the journal record. But there's a shit ton of really cool science that happens in startups. And so we've also been thinking about like, how do we motivate startups that, like, where are the opportunities? Maybe startups that didn't work out. We could fund them to go a little bit longer as they ramp down to publish their scientific results. Like these are the more like opportunistic things I'm looking for to make science outside of academia more visible and also experiment with those people in a way where I don't have to make trade-offs about something like their career path or their PhD, because I just don't think I can solve all of that at once. And I don't think that's the right order to solve it in anyway.
That makes sense. So you're essentially not catering to professors and let's say like government funding mechanisms to begin with. Okay, that makes sense.
No. Yeah, that's a whole job I'm not interested in. Like having been a professor, yeah, like I don't want to deal with trying to convince them when their incentives are just like not aligned at all. Allison?
Yeah, maybe we can discuss this alternative ecosystem really that you're involved in building there, because it's not just Arcadia. Of course, it's Astera too, then there's the Navigation Fund. So maybe you could describe a little bit like how you see these, what are these two other organizations doing?
Yeah.
If you want to talk about your role in it, obviously that's welcome. But also, how do you see the three organizations doing complementary parts almost in this larger system of giving people a sustainable alternative to move away from academia?
So all three organizations care about this topic. You're right that they're like different tactical advantages for this problem. So Arcadia is like my original baby, where it was my first chance of like just trying something different to better understand what could be valuable. So Arcadia is like an experiment in action. We're like doing it. We're doing science and we're trying these things. And that's like part of our charge to do that. Like 2 or 3 years after Arcadia, I realized that there are a lot of things happening in Arcadia that we needed more of, and not just more of the same. I need more different kinds of science programs and organizations that are happening, because some of the things we solve at Arcadia are unique to Arcadia. And I don't assume that our solutions match everybody. Like, for example, there might be like way more just like data intensive, or like the space community may have like different needs, right? I don't know what those are. So then that's when we started thinking at Astera about how do we fund more science that we can liberate to really try things differently. And that was an important thing there, was like, I think a lot of meta science funds studies about science, and not necessarily always scientists to experiment with how they do science. And those are very distinct things. And those communities actually rarely talk. And I don't feel like I see enough of the second community. And so that's our tactical strategy at Astera. What is science that is really important to do, also is not well supported already through current systems, such that we could have a huge advantage in like enabling a whole new direction, and it's not so entrenched in a very specific way of doing things that we can get people excited about like experimenting with things like publishing. And then Navigation Fund. So Navigation Fund I chair it's a little more standard in the sense that we give out grants, and we give out grants to a lot of different organizations that are building new tools for publishing. So that's our open science program there. That is really more about the tool building. But of course, like this is part of a larger ecosystem that all talks to each other, right? We need people who are doing it to surface problems and solutions, and we need people to fund the solution builders, but they have to work hand in hand. There's been too much in the past, in my opinion, of like people who are like top down, almost a little too paternalistic of here's the publishing solution, I will build it and they will come. And that actually just doesn't work. You need like hand in hand building with the actual users, which are scientists. That's the high level summary of the 3 different organizations. And I'm happy to talk more about any of them.
Yeah, maybe because they differ, I guess, in those different programs that they offer, but also somewhat in different focus areas, or at least there's overlap, and then there's some divergent as well, where Navigation Fund, for example, has the digital sentience components, the criminal justice reform component, I think the climate change component, while Astera has a very big AI or an AGI interest, also with some
Yeah.
tool building here.
Astera's
So for those
very
people that are
focused
in
on
different areas here, yeah, if you
well, Astera is very focused on science and technology, because there we're really focused on like us hiring and directly enabling people to do science in a way that's protected from having to be dealing with sort of entrenched systems. Navigation Fund is more general than that. So we do have some programs, like you're saying, that give grants out to overlapping areas, but it is broader than just science and technology. So yes, we have our open science program at Navigation Fund, and then we have our climate program, and then digital sentience, as well as other areas that are just of like personal interest to me or Jed.
Awesome. Yeah, I think the areas are super interesting. I don't know if any one of you wants to ask a question about one or any of the other orgs. I just want to give you guys some space to do that before I move on. Yeah, Matthew.
Yeah, maybe just on a question to follow up on that. What was the reason for the choice of those areas? Was it just personal interest, or where you think you already had connections, network? What was the reasoning?
I guess like a combination. Outside of those, the science and technology areas, I think both Jed and I just feel very strongly that science and technology are like core to human civilization advancing. And it feels very urgent to us to think about ways to accelerate that and increase more innovations. That explains those areas. Criminal justice is an area that I personally got very interested in. I think it's actually because of like my systems interest. The prison system, if you're interested in systems, has a lot of systemic challenges that I think limit human potential. There's a touchy-feely component to it. Of course, it's just like out of compassion for people who are stuck in the system, but it's also for thinking about humanity. If we really want to tap into the full potential of the human civilization, there's a lot of practices like the prison system that like fundamentally prevent us from doing that. So there's that. And then the animal welfare area is one that's like of great personal interest to our president, Dave Komen-Heidi, and he's been active in that field for a long time. And I think not dissimilar from what I said about the prison system, like the animal welfare is like a factory farming and all of that is like also a similar problem, right? We are actually like not making the most of living beings across the planet, and rethinking some of these systems we think could be super high leverage for improving that.
Yeah, they're both awful.
Yeah.
And guys,
I had a question maybe to do more with Astera, but also like careers of people. Like I've seen like in the latest recruit, there is Edwin Kite, I think, who is like an associate professor. And it's hard to tell like whether people have left their academic jobs or not sometimes, and it comes out a little later. But what is the anticipation? And I asked this from also a perspective of having been shortlisted once, and I was like, oh yeah, let me go all out and say I'm down to like leave because I've been engineering a departure for some time is what I keep telling myself. Right. But when it doesn't happen and you're like, okay, maybe the ambition is not as big as what I thought it was. My scale is too much for them too. Whatever those numbers might be. Like, how does one get a feel for that? But also as the funder, what are you looking at when you see someone far more senior, which I think Edwin probably is, right? If you can shed a little light on that.
Well, senior, junior is relative. I don't know. It depends on who you talk to. So I know I can't comment on Edwin personally, but what I can say is that what we're looking for is people who are like, first and foremost, very committed to a particular problem that they want to solve. So much so that their like career path or like any assumptions about that are secondary, if not tertiary, right? And so I think if you talk to any of the candidates that were really interested or the current fellows, I don't think they know. And I think that's good, actually. Like it's not the primary driver of decisions, and it's not a plan that you can be very rigid about, because what they know is that this is the best opportunity in their minds to potentially pave a path for the thing that they most want to do. And what comes after that is TBD. And that's my impression from talking to our fellows, and what I find like very exciting, because they're not so worried about that, basically. And they think that if there's a will, there's a way. And who knows what the future looks like? Who knows what this program will lead them to do? What we are not interested in, we get this from a lot of applicants. I have no idea if this is you, Anga. Don't assume that I'm talking about you, because I don't know the details. But we do get a lot of applicants that are, I will leave academia if you give me $20 million. Because if you give me $20 million, it's now safe for me to leave my academic job. And that's the bar at which like I would be willing to take this risk. Like that, while I understand that mentality, especially for people who have like families and other things, commitments and stuff, that is not a thing that we do, because we can't buy people's sense of security. We don't know if we'll be like funding them forever, right? That's not the commitment we're making. We're committing to what's the launch pad that you need to figure out your next steps. And ironically, it's like the Hindu saying, the moment you like let go, I forget the exact words, but the moment you let go of that success, you kind of achieve it. And so what we're looking for is for people to let go of planning that success, just do it. And probably if they just do it, we're very interested in follow-on funding for them. But the priorities need to be very clear around like the science and the impact. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does to some extent, but it still makes me like wonder about the people who come with students in tow, right? Which I imagine happens with some people. How does that whole thing work out? Because you can't just live for yourself forever.
They don't come with the whole program. No. Yeah. In some cases, they may hire like former trainees or whatnot, but it's not the same setup. They don't come with the whole academic program.
No, but I'm guessing like when they're making the transition, they're balancing their time, right? It's not like they've just gotten up and left their office and they're like, now this is your problem. These are my students, but there's someone else's now. I don't imagine that's how the transition is. It's not a jarring transition, I imagine, right?
It's not as drawn out as you might think. I think that for some of the candidates, they've already been plotting their departure for a while now and seeking opportunities that are better suited. And so it is actually quite fast. For some of them, they take a leave of absence and can figure out how to get those responsibilities taken care of right away. There's a lot of different strategies, and I think that they're expected to figure it out themselves, because it is an in-person job at Astera. And we've even started setting up lab space, because we really want to take people out of their normal environment and bring them together and build a community around a different practice. Yeah.
One quick question I have, which is not the actual question I want to ask, but is if you compare the trade-offs between advancing some of the areas that you guys care a lot about, let's say criminal justice or digital sentience or beneficial AI, versus the more meta-science approach of let's build better systems that can on the long term multiply efforts across all of these areas, but who knows how much time we have. I always find it like at Foresight we've been dabbling in both a little bit, and I sometimes find it really difficult to just think about the trade-offs.
Oh my gosh, so hard.
Okay, let's take the broken system that we have and just push forward on whatever science problem we want to solve, or let's take a step back, let's unwind the system, let's build better systems for the long term. I think it's still difficult. It keeps me up at night sometimes. How do you
I know. Y'all are asking such good questions, which may be my excuse for saying I don't know the answer to them either. We actually just had a meeting about this with some of the leadership yesterday of just like, what is even the plan, dude? Right now, it's like a tension. No one can predict timelines as far as AI and other things. There's a bunch of like programs and institutions that are under threat. Do you want to save them? Do you want to rebuild? Should we be worrying about short-term, long-term? Basically, I'm just commiserating with you that it's a very difficult question. I think our goal is to do a little bit of balancing across these things, but also think like, what is our advantage? Our advantage, I think, like in terms of the vibe and the willingness to take risks, is that we would rather do the like scarier stuff. So more rebuilding rather than like refining. And we should probably, because there's many funders out there, right? Like we should probably bias towards more of that in our portfolio, but have probably our hands in a couple of different buckets. But I think the thing that Jen and I talk about a lot, especially when we started this stuff, is we like to just try things that other people are unwilling to try. Like that might be unpopular or could easily blow up and not work. We're like more excited about those things. And I think the average person, in part because we don't have that much interest in a long legacy of our organizations, like after we're gone, like we're doing it all while we're alive. So it's a different mentality.
I love that. I love that you're taking this meta science approach to even thinking about whether to do more meta science versus specific focus areas of let's just experiment with that even.
Yeah.
And see what works. and
One of the cool like things though is that there's alignment that like what I want to see is scientists try something really different. The scientists that are most willing to try something different are working on things that they think are so urgent and important that they don't have time to fuck around with like worrying about old systems. And so it's nice because both are true. It's just like that's how you find the people who are like most committed to the most urgent problems actually. And for them, like worrying about stuff like tenure or whatever is just like lower on the list.
Yeah, to some extent, it's like self-selective. And of course, you're not the only ones, doing that. I think one thing that is always surprising is the whole FRO concept was like totally a concept, like even 4 years ago or something, maybe or 3 years ago. I remember when we had a seminar where like Adam and Ben were discussing the idea. And now people are literally sometimes in our application saying, when we ask them about long-term impact of the organizations, they're not saying this will be a company, but they're saying like, this might be an FRO in a few years. So they're taking
that's funny.
like
Yeah.
newly developed concepts already as their like signaling point as to what they want to build. So I think it really matters the types of examples that you said early in that space, because it makes people more comfortable to think along those lines.
Yeah. The other nice alignment is like people who worry about journals being gone rely on that as like a proxy for status or productivity or something, right? But it is a proxy. Like it's not the actual thing. It's a written up thing about the thing. And what you need in its absence, if you're going to get rid of that, is a stronger signal about the utility of a thing or the impact of a thing that supersedes like a journal impact factor or something. And so for people who are working on urgent things like climate and space and vaccines or other things, like the utility and the purpose of that is much clearer, such that you just got to make it actually useful in real life in some way. And that bar is like even higher, and it's admittedly like way more ambitious and scary to go after, but that should be the bar if that's what you care about.
Yeah. I just want to make a note, given that we only have 10 minutes left. So if any one of you wants to ask a question, whether it's on this topic or a different one, feel free to just raise your hand. Anything goes now, especially like Daniel, Dean. Yeah, of course, you're very free to just lurk, but I just want to give you the opportunity to chime in with something. Don't feel like you have to stay on topic. This is also ultimately the chance for you to get advice on things that you care about. Dean, if you want to say something, go for it.
Hi there. Sorry, I'm really sorry for being late. We got caught up with some work.
No worries.
As always is the way, unfortunately. But it's looking at how that FRO network starts and where do you begin and what's the first place to lay a foundational brick, I guess, to say, who do you contact? Is it getting to know people? Is it being in the right circles? What would you recommend?
I don't know always about FROs because we don't really do FROs, but I think if you're asking just like alternative funding sources, I think it just starts with just like looking at all of the calls that are put out already through the organizations that do this. It's surprising to me, like I read almost every entry into like when we have like requests for proposals or requests for input, and very few people provide any input. Very few people just use the like normal paths that we put out for people to do stuff. And we try and make it easy. Like the request for information is just, just whatever you want to say. Or even, on God, you probably know this from the application, like the first step for the application on Astera is just a 1-pager. And so I would say, and you're doing it for a second time. So just that's maybe the lowest hanging fruit for how to get involved, is just look for the normal paths that are like open to you, because we actually read those things. And then, of course, there's no substitute for like having more in-person interactions. And I hate saying that because my biggest worry with this whole alternative universe is that it's going to be so dependent on who you know. And if you are like chummy with this person or chummy with this person, we're trying to make that not the case. I actually don't take a lot of like calls or conversations with people one-on-one who just cold email me or are introduced by someone I know, because I worry about this, which is why we put out the call. So I can only say for Astera and TNF, just try to use those, because I want that to be the more standard approach.
Oh, awesome. Thank you for taking this one then. I'm not sure if it falls into that bucket, but we really appreciate it for sure. Maybe you could share just like from having looked at a bunch of applications, or maybe, I don't know, I guess as a chair of the board for one of the orgs, but also as a chief of strategy for one of the others, as a co-founder, CEO for Arcadia, like you've definitely come across, I'm sure, like a lot of applications on different areas. If you think about like generally like, what makes a good application versus what makes a bad application, and of course there's probably different criteria across these different organizations, but what are the types of people where you're like excited about and you're like, okay, that's a person that I think can go all the way in the new ecosystem that we're building?
So there's a couple of qualities that I look for. There's some negative signals, and then there's some qualities that I look for. One quality that I look for is this person like a self-starter who has run into lots of problems or challenges, but they like figured it out? Because I think that's like a hallmark of any founder type, right? They're a problem solver. They're going to be very high agency about like removing roadblocks that are in their own way. Sometimes that takes the shape of they switched fields. Sometimes that takes the shape of they figured out how to work around a thing. And so that's one thing that I look for. A second thing that I look for is a little more thoughtfulness about like, how does like what I want to do fit with this opportunity, and not just sending some proposal that they've shopped around everywhere. And you can tell if they've thought deeply about what the differentiators of this approach would be. And I almost like it when they themselves show some skepticism about their ideas, right? Because what that tells me is like they're trying to get to the bottom of it. Is this the right opportunity? Are my ideas sound like this could fail for this and this reason, but like we would know this? And like a little bit of humility in that, because they're not trying to just portray success, they're trying to answer something. And I feel like that's a quality of like a truly good scientist, that's strong opinions, weakly held. Like they feel very passionate. They want to solve this problem. They have to feel passionate enough about some theory that they're willing to like put their all into it, but they're also so committed to knowing if it's right or not that they're also willing to like let go if that's not true. So I look for that in the way they talk about it, the way they like bring up things that could fail, the way they've pivoted in the past. Sometimes we ask people what's something that didn't go so well in the past and like why, how would you do it differently? And some people really can't think of anything. And I could tell you like 10 things right now. So I'm like looking for that basically like scientific quality in someone. Negative signals are like name dropping, anything that just like relies on proxies instead of like the substance of the thing. Inability to articulate if this worked, what's the like big outcome here? Often people aren't always thinking about that. They're just like, oh, I'm just trying to do these next steps. I don't know what could happen. And we're looking for that big picture thinking, because that's what's going to guide someone in the twists and turns of any project.
That's so interesting on the name dropping, because I also feel conflicted about this, because on the one hand, you only have so little space to make your case, and you need to, especially if you don't know the evaluators, you need to signal somehow that you at least have familiarized yourself with concepts and people in that space, and you need to do that quickly. And then, of course, on the other hand, like just dropping a bunch of names in there looks absurd.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's hard. And then
There's
I
a
think-
difference between those two things you said, though, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And you can tell one is like referencing the work of a person because it's relevant to the argument you're making. One is, I know X, like non sequitur.
That's true. Yeah. In the final 2 minutes, do you have any, I guess, like advice? I'm not even sure that's a good question to ask you, given that we started this conversation with you saying that
I
path
know.
that you're taking is quite idiosyncratic. To the extent that there is any advice that you can distill from that, if you want to leave our fellows with anything, that would be really wonderful.
Actually, maybe I would just turn the question around to the fellows. What's something that I can tell you in the last 2 minutes that's like the most useful? Or what's the thing that you're struggling with the most right now?
For me, confidence to take a step into the unknown. It sounds like you have that kind of naturally inbuilt somehow. I can't remember something you said earlier about feeling most comfortable in the risky unknown or something. Yeah, perhaps you could speak more to that. For me, that doesn't come
It's
naturally.
funny for that question to be coming from you of all people, because when you started your introduction, you talked about all these different ways you've pivoted in fields, in your role. Like, I feel like there's a confidence in there already, is there not? Like, you have to, like, I don't know, be willing to fail and be the newcomer, basically. I guess maybe the way I think about it is just like, I really let my brain go and explore like the worst case scenarios and just get comfortable with that. Don't get tenure. Okay, like, well, who cares actually? What does that mean? What would it take for that to happen? And what would that mean? It's like a slow burn situation. It's probably fine. I'm like, I can find other jobs in that time. So I start doing this kind of mapping where I actually try and just think about the literal worst case scenario that I'm like trying to optimize around avoiding, and then make a plan around that. And then it defangs it such that you can now suddenly feel okay with that nuclear option, which makes you way clearer in your thinking about what you want to do. So maybe that would be a good thing to name for yourself. What is the thing you're most worried about? Just try and map that out. Is it actually as bad as you think? And what are the contingencies? But also, like, that it's not so likely that it'll happen, right? Like, how likely is it actually?
Yeah, often putting words to the worst case scenario makes you realize that it's not that bad. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
talk about it.
Thing to
Yeah.
say, isn't it? But like, it's a good position to be in if you realize that the worst case
Yeah.
scenario.
I guess if I think back to like when I left academia, it started with me just like telling people that. Like, I started talking about it with my colleagues. Like, I was like, I'm not sure if this is like the right place for me. Like, it's almost a scary thing to even talk about. But once you start talking about it, it makes it less scary. So think about who in your network would be great people for you to talk to about that. And just like, that way you can like actually think about what you do want to do. Because it's such a like mental load to be worrying about that as you're trying to plot something proactive. I don't know if that's helpful to any.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you.
I hope that at that point you don't think that your research is so important that if it doesn't happen, the world will get destroyed, and you think about that other worst case scenario.
I don't know how. Yeah. Think about all the other ways the world could end. Yeah.
That's true. Hey, thank you so much. Thanks for staying
Yeah.
2 minutes longer. I really appreciate
problem.
it. Thanks everyone for your great questions. And yeah, I really appreciate that you took the time to talk.
Yeah.
about this,
Yeah.
and it was really
Thanks for
wonderful to
joining. It's nice to
hear
meet
your
you all.
perspective. Thank you.